Hey, quick pre-roll shout out to OnWeCaster, the open source platform we use to record our podcast episodes with guests. They support open source charity programs like Innovate for Vegas Foundation by offering their platform for free, and for that we thank them. Visit ecaster.com, that's ECASTR.com, for more information and to try them out. Now, on with the show. Hey, welcome to Let's Innovate for Vegas, episode 11. We have a very special guest today, whom I have not actually spoken to in quite some time, but is brilliant. And I'm happy to have her to talk about building the world, which is something that we should all experience at some point. Today is May 4th, by the way, and I'm not going to say it. I don't know if Tara will say it, but Tara Hernandez is our guest today. Thank you for being here, Tara.
And may the 4th be with you. I'll say it. Sorry. We just have to. Somebody's
yeah, I know.
Say it.
I kind of, I'm on the fence. I saw Star Wars in a movie theater in 1977, and it was great. And all the stuff that's happened since is like almost like really, it was just good as it was. Empire Strikes Back was good too, but it's just gotten weird. But anyway, yeah, may the 4th be with you. Sure, okay, I said it. Fine.
And just as a side note, George Lucas lives like a mile away from me, or at least he has a house about a mile away from me, and Skywalker Ranch, where they do all their audio, is on the other side of the hill. So I'm kind of living in sort of key Star Wars country.
Does he ever fly through the area in his what do you call it, the snow speeder? Does he have one? That would be awesome. I think that would be cool.
Sadly, no. That's limited to the crazy skateboarders in New York.
Everybody wants a flying car, but I want a snow speeder. Those are awesome. Anyway, so who is Tara Hernandez? Anyway, that is my first question, but I will say that the last time I actually... No, not the last time. My fondest memory of Tara, the one that pops to mind immediately, and I've often referred to this, is Tara approaching my... Am I saying your name correctly? Tara, right? I'm from back east, so we say words differently.
It's fine. Yeah, it's all good.
So Tara's coming down the cube hallway at Netscape with a hockey stick and a traffic cone, because I broke the build. And that was a little special greeting. That it wasn't just me. I'm sure there are many of us out there in support groups and still undergoing therapy. It was not to be messed with, Tara. And but anyway, so that was not the only memory, but certainly a fond one. But Tara and I met at Netscape, and I will begin by saying, what were you doing before Netscape, and we'll kick it off.
Before I was at Netscape, I was at a company called Borland International, which was an early developer tools company that did databases and compilers. Yeah. Before that, I graduated with a degree in computer science from University of California at Santa Cruz.
I've used the Borland Pascal was my, because I learned Pascal when I was 12, and I was like, I gotta have so I got a Z80 card for my 2E and Borland Pascal, and I was coding away. And we're going to get to Netscape, don't worry. But so then you were at Netscape, and then after Netscape,
after the carnage that was the Source 331 project and the creation of Mozilla.org, the diaspora began, and I joined a bunch of other Netscapees, as we called ourselves, at an early e-commerce startup called Blue Martini.
I remember that.
Yeah, and then Blue Martini was going really well, and I thought, oh, hey, at one point I think I calculated I was worth about $7 million on paper, so I was an internet millionaire once. But we went public in 2001, and by the time we got out of employee blackout, let's just say a whole lot of zeros had come off the end of that valuation. Yeah. And after about 4 years at Blue Martini, I went to Pixar Studios. I did kind of a left turn. And I was at the studio for almost 11 years, and that was a lot of fun. And then after a while, it became clear that Pixar for someone like me was really a career death trap. I could have stayed and made the exact same amount of money, which by now would have been, we'd be living on the streets. But I was like, I better get back out there, into the main high-tech industry space. I went for 1 year. It was kind of my wife referred to it as my rebound job at a company called Lithium. Which was pretty fun, but they had a kind of a crazy circumstance, and I ended up jumping on opportunity to become the director of building and infrastructure and SRE at Linden Lab, which is a virtual world company, which was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, and that turned into an opportunity to go to Google, and was at Google for 4 years, and that was a very interesting experience. Learned a lot there too. And now I'm vice president of developer productivity at MongoDB. And there you have the whole story of my professional life.
That is, you have fewer things. Somehow I would change jobs every, whenever the wind blowed, whenever the wind blew.
Yeah, I tried. I'm not super interested in moving fast. Like there's a couple opportunities, like lithium. I was only there for a year. That was a little bit circumstantial, but I feel like I really want to kind of get in there and give something a go. And that usually means a couple of years of willing to kind of dig in and invest. I think if you move too quickly, at least for myself, I miss out on opportunities. And I probably miss out on opportunities by not moving, right? They say the best way to get raises is to move more quickly.
Oh, yeah. I have to admit that was not the bad part. Because I literally would tell people like, well, every time I changed jobs, I made more money. That's good. I did fall for the chasing stock options trap, which
as so many do. Yes.
But after I left Netscape, I went to Umax, and they did it. Of course, this doesn't work, but they're like, oh, you get ISOs that vest 100% the day we go public, no matter how long you're here. And you're like, at the time, I was like, great.
Right.
Looking
the
back,
day
you're like,
you go public. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to do it. But that was actually one of my favorite jobs in general. Just very educational, great group of people. We were across the street from Great America. No, not Great America. What was the amusement park in Santa Clara?
No, that was Great America.
Okay, Great America.
Yeah.
So we used to go, lunchtime. Hey, you want to go ride Top Gun? You want to, sure. So that was fun. It was a fun group. I'm still in touch with many of those people today. So same with several Netscape people, the Weinsteins and the people like you, of course, and so a few people I've stayed in touch with. So those were fun times. But at Umax was when I realized, why am I going for, oh, you have stock options, great. I should try to find a group of people like this or things that are interesting, because the work was also fascinating. So yeah, I think eventually you probably enjoy working at Mongo.
I do. I've been here coming up on a year. It'll be a year on the 16th. And
you get there. How you get there? Yeah.
So I was at Google, like I said, for about 4 years, roughly. And I moved around quite a bit. I went to Google in part. My tenure at Linden Lab was coming to kind of a natural close. The organization was moving in a direction where having someone who was a director overseeing what I was overseeing, we were going to split the teams up, and my role no longer made sense. And I love my VP, Landon McDowell, amazing guy. He's really in the game industry, and he's at a new company now. I forget the name of it, but he was at Riot for a while and Xbox. But he's like, I want to try and keep you, and I'm like, Landon, I'm too expensive now, right? This is not a good use of from a business perspective. It doesn't make sense to keep me. And right around then is when Google reached out. I'm like, well, let me try this, check this out. And there was a woman at Google named Melody McFessel, and who I had enormous respect for. And if you Google search her, you'll find she and Sabrina Farmer are both very well-known personages who came up through the ranks at Google in SRE, and both ended up ultimately as VPs of engineering. These amazing women. And she said, hey, come bring your experience doing developer tools, software development, ecosystems, all of this experience that you have, and help us build good developer tools here at Google Cloud. And I'm like, I've never done product stuff. That's not my background. And I thought, why not? And I want to learn from this woman in particular, who has a background that's somewhat similar to me and who's so well regarded. I felt like that's a great opportunity. I should take that. And of course, Google pays pretty well. Can't complain. Ironically, and this happens a lot at Google, I came to learn about a year after I got there, a little less maybe, her organization that I hired into ended up getting dissolved, and she quit. So like the main reason I went there was now gone. So I kicked around for a while, and as you know, I've been doing the manager thing for a long time, starting at Netscape. So I stepped in as kind of emergency manager for hire for a couple of developer teams. Because all of a sudden they found that they were missing a manager, so I was coming in and helping keep the team going, and then identifying my a replacement. So the Kubernetes container tools team, for example, the team that does Minikube, Scaffold, what's the other one? Canico. So I kind of stepped in, was helping out there, and then helped grow one of their existing engineers into the manager. And eventually the director I was working with at the time, she's like, you have such a passion around how these tools are actually used by customers, because that was my background. It's like, I wouldn't want to use this. This is nuts. Or I would really like to use this. Tell me more about it. She said, have you ever thought about DevRel? I had never worked with a developer relations organization before. I'd never worked at a company that had one. So I'm like, okay, why not? I'm here to learn. So I ended up going over to developer relations for Google Cloud, and I was there for about 2 years, and boy, I learned a ton. And one of the things I learned was that it was great to have the opportunity to go back to not doing product-oriented work. And so after about 2 years, Mark Porter, who's the CTO of MongoDB, sent me a cold email saying, "Hey, we're spinning up this new developer productivity team. We want you to come run it." And I'm like, baloney, Mark Porter, CTO of MongoDB, just sent me a cold email. This is a fish. So I start looking for links and what is this thing? And then I don't know if you remember Brad Porter, who was at Netscape.
No.
Yeah, I can't remember what team he was on. But anyway, I pinged him. I'm like, hey, do you know this guy? And by the way, if you're related, I'm going to make fun of your family for having all these CTOs. And he goes, no, I know him from Amazon. He's not my brother, but you should go talk to him. This is legit. He would totally do that. And so Mark and I started talking, and next thing I know, I'm like, yes, I want to come work for you and do cool things at MongoDB for how you guys do software development. So that's where I ended up. Long story.
Well, the journey is part of the gift.
It is.
I eventually managed to LinkedIn. I hate LinkedIn. Really, I use that word directly and appropriately. But I did manage to connect, and I don't know if I introduced them, Mike McCool from Netscape and a different Mike McCool from Intel.
Nice.
I was like, now I know all of the Mike McCools that are worth knowing. And they're like, somebody said, no, my sister's name is Michelle. That's sort of like, and I was like, whatever. You're both nerds. But both, of course, very smart people. So that's kind of funny when you run into, you're like, you're not even related? Really? That's crazy. But Netscape was such a melting pot of different talent because it was such a magnet, right? So many people were drawn into the mission.
Yeah, you think about the early browser people, from Illinois, but also Kansas, Garrett Blythe and Lou Montulli, who had worked on Lynx, which was an early kind of, ASCII-based browser. And then you had Chouk and Mark and those folks. But then you had the SGI folks, right? Yep. And then you had the Linux nerds like, Jamie Zawinski, who came in with all of his experience in the free software world and Linux, or Lucid Emacs.
Yep.
And then the acquisitions started, right? If you remember, I forgot how long we overlapped, but at one point, up through version 3 of the browser, it was a C backend that fit on a floppy.
Yep.
Right. It was the first thing I did when I got to Netscape. I think that first week I cut the 1.2 floppy disk for Windows. But then we acquired Collabra, I forget what the name of it was.
I think it was Collabra because that's where Jeff Winter was from. And that
exactly.
He was manager, so,
yeah, Collabra. And then, the back end went from C to C++. And now it doesn't fit. It barely fits on a CD, let alone a floppy. And so, some of your listeners are probably like, what are they talking about? What is this physical media thing you refer to?
It doesn't fit on a save icon.
There you go. Seriously. So, but and it's funny, how much that really changed the dynamics of the culture, and also the whole this was the pre-Linux days, and we want this to be everywhere, so it means it has to run on everything, and that was the birth of Tinderbox as a concept, which was we didn't call it continuous integration yet because Martin Fowler hadn't invented the term, but that's essentially what it was, right? Which is just a way of having a single source that was able to be built on multiple operating systems on multiple chipsets, as quickly as possible. It was a really hard problem.
And that is the crux of why I wanted to talk to you today. There's several reasons, but that's important, which I don't know if I can even describe why I think it's important. But I will say, when I joined Netscape, it was right at the end of Navigator version 3, before Communicator version 4. So I started working for Jeff, who was part of the acquisition, so Jeff Winter. And my badge did not have a picture, and then somewhere along the line they started adding pictures, and I remember the absolute abject frustration and like hands up in the air, like, it's over. We don't need no sticking pictures on our badges, and now I'm not going to know who people are without looking at the picture. So that growth spurt really was interesting, and I think that is part of the big picture, because when you know everybody enough that you don't really need a picture, you just know who they are, that kind of thing. There's a certain sense of mission, if you will, right? We're all kind of in this, and we know, I know I know they're working on that, and you're working on that. Once you start spreading across buildings, and I always tell people, we were using CVS without pserv, right? So auto mounting directly, never change to mSource, right? Remember that?
Never change, yes.
Never CD mSource.
Right, the line endings will get all screwed up.
Oh yeah,
it'll be sad.
So it was such a trust organization in that, as you didn't know people, and they're checking stuff in and breaking the tree, and there's hockey sticks and traffic cones involved, and
and the lemon. Don't forget the lemon.
Yeah,
the lingering lemon of build brokenness.
And then so because we ate our own dog food, as the saying goes, so there's all these web pages internally, like the CVS blame stuff was all, you could just read it anytime from your browser. Anybody could read it. All the HR services, everything was a web-based sort of attempt at something, not necessarily beautiful or completely useful, but it was there. But as the organization grew, and I was only there enough to see Communicator, and then I was off to UMax, but chasing stock options. But it was interesting to see that growth spurt and how really expensive that is.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it, I think, and this is sort of one of the things I wanted to touch on in general with you today, is that lack of connection to what's really happening. So when you're building the world, other people are almost literally unbuilding it by breaking the build or by making big sweeping changes that impact everyone without everyone knowing it ahead of time, which sort of breaks the build, but not maybe not immediately, obviously. Right. People, that change doesn't show up until you click on that, and then it's over. So I almost wonder, and so that's why I really want to talk about this. This is why I want to explore history a little bit, because I think Tinderbox, the fact that, and I never know the right number, so you can tell me today and I will know now forever, like how many platforms were you building, not only the front facing like client software, the Navigator, the Communicator, the actual web browser, but also the server, which I also was writing some code for, and anything else that was in the mix. There was a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you know what? I actually can't answer that question. I was so hyper fixated on the client. I can't actually speak to what was going on the server side.
Okay, so how many clients?
But even for just the client, I think at our peak, we were building across 42 different operating system distro variants. Mm-hmm. Those weren't all prioritized the same way. And I think the late Brian Ostrom had posted on Usenet at some point. He said, if you send us, the disks for your OS and the manuals, if you have them, and the hardware, if it's necessary, we will attempt to get the browser working for you. And I think Dan Mosdale actually got it working on the Amiga at one point, if I remember correctly, right, which was sort of a fun win. I mean, useless business-wise, but cool. So we had 8, I think it was 8 tier 1 platforms, and then 42 total.
Right.
Right. And there was some really weird ones. Germany, if I remember correctly, we laughed about this a lot, seemed to be a place where a lot of different, custom operating systems were developed. Maybe it was because of all the electronics. I don't know. But yeah, it was crazy. And, because Tinderbox was so simple, there wasn't a protocol that you had to standardize on. It was just email. It was true client server. The client was completely self-contained. It would CVS sync your stuff up. It would run the compile. It would format the log and then mail the log. And I remember that when the Netscape systems engineers finally got annoyed enough at the amount of traffic that was going to the mail server that they actually spun out a separate mail server just for our stuff.
Right.
And that was it. That was, and then some code, some Perl code to process the logs, and then that turned into initially. When it was just the build team, it was colored text. So you would go to the first version of Tinderbox was this, green and red and yellow lines that showed what the builds were doing. And then Lloyd Tabb, who was one of the creators of Composer and invented half of HTML, he wrote the infamous Lloyd.cgi, which actually turned into the kind of cool color delineated table so that you could see the axes of builds over time by distribution. And that was the ultimate Tinderbox, the really cool part of Tinderbox. So all praise Lloyd Tab.
Yeah, although you did say Brian Ostrom, who did pass away. I'm amazed at how many people did succumb to illness and so on. I actually had opportunities, multiple, to work with Brian. I do remember him. He was super helpful. And I remember I can't remember what I was doing. I had to build, I don't know if I was building for RSA or some other thing I was working on, but I came over and sat in your little domain in the,
in the build pit.
And he was as helpful as you would hope someone could be, and that was part of the deal. Was in this group to enable building the world. You had to kind of go, oh, okay, I can help you with that part. There's you can't just go, oh, just I don't have time for that. There was no dismissal. There was no I'm too busy, or just leave it there. And it was very interactive and a very supportive culture inside, which I think was part of the upside that I would question if it still exists in places today, but maybe
I think it does and can, but it only happens when there is support for it, right? And this is I think the thing that I learned, and looking back to my time at Netscape, I realized that some of the fundamentals for how I view organization health is through that lens. And there's a lot of things that happen at Netscape that in retrospect I'm completely horrified by, right? Like, the fact that we were working 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, like, oh, yes, we were producing garbage, right? Nobody's doing good work when they're that tired all the time. But that concept of culture as being a critical value add to your organization, I think we have seen, and now these days when we talk about developer productivity, there's whole white papers now being written on the aspects of culture by definition being the processes and communication standards that you have in addition to the tooling and technical solutions that you create. And so what Netscape had, if you look at the source code, we had this massive global symbol table. It was just terrible. It was like, looking back, I was like, this is terrible. It was written by college dropouts. Like, not to disparage anyone, but it's not like we were doing something that was just technically awe-inspiring. That wasn't what made Netscape really cool. What made Netscape cool is we figured out something to do that was really hard in a way that under normal circumstances was impossible, right? We had a shared vision. We had a commitment to that dream and to each other, right? Like Brian Ostrom liked to think of himself as a surly bastard, but he was actually amazing and knew more than just about anybody besides Richard Stallman maybe about Gmake, right? And loved to share that. He loved to share and took pride in the fact, like, hey, we got this thing to work on yet another platform just by modifying this one makefile rule, right? So yep. I think that spirit of innovation and collaboration was very strong, and it's, as much as I am able, it's something that I try to work on and with every team that I oversee. How do, the focus on how do we talk to each other? How do we document? What is our process? How do we enable ourselves to not work 80, 90, 100-hour weeks, but to get better with what we have by crowdsourcing, by collaboration, that kind of thing. It's so important.
Absolutely. And I think, maybe we'll get there now. I have this volunteer organization, Innovate for Vegas, and it's civic hacking, civic volunteerism, open source. The whole idea is to make our smart city smarter. It's part of our tagline. Mm-hmm. And so everything we're doing hopefully will be useful to other places. There are many, Code for America has sort of kicked out the brigade system. So each locality is kind of on its own, I guess. But there are many organizations around the country and the world, really, Code for All, where it's like, hey, I have a few hours a week to contribute to open source projects. So then the culture overrides, there's no deliverable per se, because it's volunteer time. It's really hard to say we need to ship this tomorrow and there's nothing in it for you financially. Mm-hmm. That's hard, right? That's a hard sell. However, if it's we can ship this and you will see the results on the faces or in the interactions with people that are around you or that you know personally. The reward has to be sort of from within, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I've found that other places, not Vegas, and I'm not here to pick on Vegas exactly, but I am here. There just seems to be a lack of sense that has value, right? It's more about like, wait, what am I going to get for doing this? And it is the younger coders or younger innovators. But I think what I saw at Netscape was, yes, we were all being paid and we had our ISOs, incentive stock options, whatnot. But there, like the people that were working there, you weren't getting extra money for working 80 hours a week. And I remember I was there for 4 days in a row one time. I didn't even go home.
Right. Right. No, I'm right there with you. But that idea of feedback and recognition, which is so powerful, we did have there too. And in fact, I give a lot of props to, I mentioned Jamie Zawinski earlier. I give a lot of props to him because I think he was one of the big proponents for maintaining it. So if you remember, the Netscape browser had the about pages.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Yes.
And you could go and you could see, every engineer for a long time was listed. And so that idea of attribution that I think you've mentioned is incredibly powerful and has value. Right? People like to be rewarded for their work, be recognized for what they've contributed.
Sure. I have a very weird story with that. So because, about the Hugo, for example, was that people could find it. So I was suddenly visible to the world. And I mean that literally because one day at Netscape, I don't have the email, obviously, but I received an email from, I was like 22, I think, when I was, 25 maybe, somewhere in there. I received an email from a kid, I think he said he was 13, also named Dan Hugo from South Africa.
Right on.
He's like, oh, I have the same name as you. And I think he said he was 13, 12, 13, whatever. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Okay, fun. This was before there was a Twitter, before you could Google search for names. There was no Twitter, no Google, no nothing. So don't know how he found me. Now, it's funny or interesting because his Twitter handle is DG Hugo. We're connected on LinkedIn today. He became an ex-Tara athlete. And for years on and off, I would get mentioned on Twitter and I would get emails and like, oh, do you want to be we're going to sponsor, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I appreciate it, but I am not an ex-Tara triathlete.
Right.
But I mean, it's a weird little facet of connection, I guess, that because of that about feature, I was what do you call it? Surfaced to a kid in South Africa who, we have the same name. So that's kind of fun. It's one of those little tiny tidbits that nobody really thinks about, but it's like, oh yeah, that's how that happened.
I have a variation of that story. It's not nearly as cool from that perspective, but I have a entertainment industry doppelganger. There is a Tara Hernandez, who was the writer and I think producer for The Big Bang Theory, and now I think there's a show called Mrs. Davis. And so, if you Google that name, Tara Hernandez, you get a mix of me and her. And I know I've gotten the writing, producing questions, and I sometimes wonder, wistfully, does she ever get like CI/CD questions?
She has to. I mean, that's. I mean, there's some sort of equity in the internet, right?
Who knows? So,
how do I build? What the action should I create for? Anyway, and it's funny because probably I don't know if she could answer. Well, some of what you do probably applies to workflow for writing things. So.
Well, and also we both have IMDb entries because as a Pixar Studios employee, I got an IMDb entry. That's cool. And then because of Code Rush and Valley of the Boom, some of the documentaries, I actually have screen credits for that too. So it gets a little weird, but that's neither here nor there. That's
cool. I mean, these are the little. So the fact that you are mentioned there, my story of my name, doppelganger. Anyway, these are those little things that's why I think the value of attribution or being recognized by humans, right? The money comes, and I always tell people, there will be. We're a nonprofit charity, right? But by having direct attribution, I want to enable people to have a value for like, hey, this was really useful. Can I give you $10 or whatever? Vegas is a culture of gratuities and tipping, right? So
yes,
but even more important, it's a real thing to put on your resume. There will be other people who will also, references and whatnot. ideally will be some sort of employment opportunities that you can say, oh, I worked on this real project at city scale. It wasn't a portfolio app that everybody writes. It was actually
and that's
making
becoming to be more recognized as a value
Absolutely.
proposition. You'll see
Yeah.
like a lot of places where they have a service to intake, job recruitment. They'll ask like, do you have a GitHub handle? Do you have public code? Right.
Exactly. And even weirder or more difficult, I guess, more uphill, I'm trying to get the non-coders to use GitHub. And I said, it's a job skill. You should be able to interact, especially if you're using, like I'm using GitHub for, I call it Agile for Volunteers. So I have the user stories in there as issues, and we can, hey, you want to work in Figma, but we can still attach, things you're working on to the things you're building outside of a GitHub or the typical code editor. So then later when we want to compile all the attribution so that everybody gets recognition, you have a place that we can point to. We have all the work you did. We have the bug, everything. It still works even if you're not a coder. So that's been a little bit of a challenge because it's like testing, I'm not a coder.
Yeah. Well, you could be a tester. You could be write documentation.
Yep.
Like I think you're right. There's a world of opportunity there to demonstrate, your ability to learn and contribute in creative ways, right? Any manager worth their salt will recognize the value in that.
And I always say we project managers, coders, testers, documentation, as you say, all these things you just said, and then internationalization, localization.
There you go. Yeah.
And
Another good one.
Now, I remember working a little bit with the team. It was 5 or 6 people, I think, at Netscape. But here, people don't often think about this because and I will tell you, the census data that they use, because of the census response or the results, Las Vegas considers English and Spanish as the 2 languages of note, of record. So they basically use those 2. And I said, we have 40 to 50 million people visiting here every year. They don't all speak English and Spanish.
No.
Like, yeah, we know. And I said, and I'm pretty sure the internet has solved language translation, at least to make things usable.
It really has.
And yet they really don't make that bridge easy. So for the transit stuff, for example, I help tourists all the time because I ride the bus and I'm a nice person. So I've talked to people, not in the last week, but certainly this calendar year, from Japan and Poland and Germany and I think France and maybe some other places. Sometimes they speak enough broken English that we can just speak English, but I'm pointing at things and I'm pulling up maps and I'm like, you're here and you're going to go there. We're doing the I jokingly said yesterday, I just speak really loud and slowly, and they, but I'm kidding. But we don't do the things that we should do. We invite people from all around the world to come here, and then we're like, good luck. You don't speak Spanish? Oh, well. So I think these are the sorts of attitudes that when we do open source and when we do really open collaboration, and that people are using your stuff and you can actually you can actually interact with them, you will see the value of thinking about them in what you do. And that extends to QA, and that extends to all these other things that are not traditional coding, because it all matters.
It really does. I always say there's more to shipping software than writing code. That's actually, in some cases, the easiest part, right? Not always. I don't want to be dismissive of developers who have a hard job, but it's like you have to identify market fit. There's all of these other sort of surrounding things around organizationally, project management, documentation, testing, build systems, caching, blah. Mm-hmm. And then there's the enabling sales. How do you help the salespeople retire their quota? What are this? How is it supported? How do you drive down cost of support? Right? There's like all of these different things, and we don't necessarily teach our developers at companies about all that stuff because it's not. One could argue that it's not super relevant, but at the same time, as they grow, like for myself, for a long time I couldn't have cared less what was going on in things outside of R&D organizations. It just wasn't impactful. And now looking back, I realized, well, that was really short-sighted, because there were things that even back then we could have done that probably could have, if we had a more collaborative mindset, we probably could have made, some really interesting opportunities come to pass that help the business as a whole. So it's like, how do you balance that? You don't want to overwhelm people by making them responsible for knowing too many things, but at the same time, keeping them under complete siloed isolation isn't good either. I don't know. There's probably a happy medium somebody will figure out eventually.
Yeah, I don't know if you're a fan of Hitchhiker's Guide, but
Well, sure.
the interconnectedness of all things comes up
Mm-hmm.
in somewhere. That yeah, I think you can you don't have to be hands on. Like people in my I was in the hardcore technologies. I think we came up with. So Jeff Winter's group was doing SSL and NSPR and all this. We didn't have to do what you were doing every day, and you didn't have to do what we were doing every day, but we knew where you sat. I knew where Brian was to get some good help.
Mm-hmm.
Not that you weren't, but you know what I mean. And
Right. No offense.
and they knew where we were. But I mean, because everybody kind of knew, like, oh yeah, I can't tell you how I tell people to this day, like, um, Tahir El Gamal was in our group, right? I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I remember sitting in a meeting, like my early meeting. I said, "That's Tara Elgamal. Is in like I know who that is. I've read about the knapsack algorithm. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
a real and what's his name? Bruce Schneer came by a couple times. You know, like you're running into all these people, and they're interacting like you as though you're peers. And you're like, oh, they're way smarter than me. But you could have these conversations, and I think the value of you could call it a level playing field, but like there is, when I worked at Apple, for example, I did get the, oh, it works fine on my machine. Very dismissive. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, you're just a tester. Cause I was an Apple QA for a while. That was one of my first jobs, which was seminal, right? Once you learn how to do QA or be a part of that process, when you're an engineer, you don't do that anymore. You don't say, oh, you're like, oh, you're making me a better engineer and we're shipping better products because of the things you're doing. I'm not going to be dismissive of you. You're helping me. So once you learn that and how the team actually works, I think it's valuable. And that's kind of some of the stuff I'm trying to instill is like, I'm not going to tell you what to do. We are going to figure out what we need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Uh, no, it's very true. As a quick aside, I have to tell you a funny story. When I took over that at Google, when I took over that container tools team that I was talking about,
mm-hmm.
one of my engineers was Sharif El Gamal, and turns out like it's Tahir's son. Like,
Nice.
oh my God, the tech is so small. It is so incredibly small,
Oh, yeah.
and great guy. And part of it, that team had a fantastic culture, very collaborative. And they got to be Googlers working on open source, which most Googlers don't get to do. So that was really fun too. And that team was a delight to work on, and it had that sense of we're all in this together. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you there? I remember there was a B box in somewhere in our group at Netscape. Did you ever have to build for that? Do you remember that being on the list anywhere?
Well, yeah, I think I remember. Like, I didn't have to care about it officially, right? Because it wasn't like the Amiga. It wasn't like a list that anybody. It was more of an academic exercise. But I remember people talking about it and cursing about it. To be honest.
Yeah, well, so that'll be funny because when I worked at Palm, I worked with Travis Gesselbrecht. If
Mm-hmm.
you, if you're a BOS fan or the Haiku OS that has become the open source sort of derivative of that, everybody knows Travis G in that community. He was the kernel guy and everything. Super nice, super brilliant guy. I worked very closely with him at Palm. Just a gem. And so I put assemble, like you said, it's a small world. You start assembling this like and then that person and this person and they know that other person and they did this, and you really, and this does sort of align with what I wanted to talk to you about today, which is all these people that have done so many interesting interlocking things. We're like, if that person didn't do that part, we wouldn't have this other thing that we have now. And I'm being very abstract because I can't really think
Mm-hmm.
of great examples, but how do we, because, and this is where we tie it all together, I suppose, and we have about 20 more minutes. How do we instill in people today the effort that they do not have to expend from yesterday in order to accomplish the things they're doing? And I think I've identified, or I describe it as this: people today may put the effort in to make things work without understanding how they work, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't really take the time to figure out all the things that you and the Tinderbox group, if the build group, or the people that were near you, or the people in our group that had to figure out how to make sure we got the things to you correct. Like there's all these interacting parts that people sort of discount now and say, just build a container and put it in there and check it into GitHub, and who cares, right? It's not that simple. But so how and you're in the developer experience region of the world, and so how do you enable those people to feel like yeah, I want to know how this actually works, not just type in a command line and don't worry about it, because that's what I see too much of lately, I think, in my opinion.
And it's interesting because then you think about where some of the art for this stuff is going. I think about a GitHub action, which is super cool, and I don't think it's particularly complicated at the end of the day, but it does make it very easy to kind of not have to care about what's going on under the covers, right. And so one of the things that I find that is a sort of a truism is that, rule number one for Tara is that developers hate change, right? Even if the thing that they're doing is kind of broken and busted, they have probably figured out and adapted to it such a way they can still be efficient. And so if you go touch that, even if it's going to give them incremental improvements, it's going to be disruptive, and, they got work to do. So then that became the rule of, ballpark order of magnitude provable improvement before you even go talk to them, so that they see that it's undeniably going to be in their best interest. So that's one aspect of it, but that doesn't actually address what you're talking about, which is to get them interested in the how, right? That you can explain the why. You have to figure out how much how should they need, and that comes to customizability or extensibility, right? So because at any given company, you're going to have a certain number of people who it's their job to worry about the developer tooling and product and services. They will never be able to keep up with every possible request. So, as a culture, do you invest in an ecosystem that is able to sustain self-serviceability or broader breadth of collaboration opportunities in a safe way, so that you can then invite those developers who I really wish I could do a thing, and you know what, I want it so badly, I'm willing to do it myself, and you can say, here you go, right? And because you've set up the infrastructure such that they can operate within it, get in, get their thing done, get out, and then you're agreeing to maintain it. Hang on just a second.
Sure.
Sorry, the dogs. So there are pros and cons to this, right? Any system that is extensible or customizable, by nature, that increases risk. Right, because the worst thing you can do to a piece of code is to touch it. Once it's working, once you touch it, it might not work anymore. And so within the infrastructure,
TDD.
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, exactly. Right. So having a good test culture such that it's when you touch it, it's really easy to know that you touched it in a way that is wrong, and fix that. That is a part of it's good practice for product development, and it's good practice for product development infrastructure. Right, and so that's part of how do you enable it. And one of the things I really like about MongoDB, and one of the things that really sold me on coming here, is MongoDB invests very heavily, and has all along, in good development infrastructure. They have a CI system. It's called Evergreen CI. It is open source. I don't think anybody uses it but us, but it's there if people want to look at it. And it's a CI system designed to support a distributed database, the building and testing of a distributed database. And so it's and a lot of the developers have been at MongoDB for a long time and have a history, and in some cases may have been a developer of Evergreen, and they take that knowledge with them when they go off. And so there's actually a really neat culture. It's not pervasive. It's not like everybody in the company is going and poking at Evergreen, but there's that knowledge that you could, right? That you could go in there and you could contribute and put a PR through and get that feature in. And I do think there's value to that, because it also, to your point, it builds that level of respect of, an Evergreen developer is like a MongoDB developer. It's just a different tool, right? And that really opens up, I think, opportunities in really neat ways. And so that one of the other cool thing that MongoDB has from a culture perspective is twice a year there's this thing called Skunkworks. All work stops for a week, and you go, and there's projects that people propose, and you can either propose your own project or you can sign on to another project and you can go implement stuff. And so, some of my engineers who normally work on Evergreen, were working on AIML, and other folks were working on Evergreen that don't normally work on Evergreen. And so it really shows the health of the positivity around the idea of the developer tools being a value add. That's respected. So that's,
Right.
not all companies have that, and it's really too bad because I think it's super powerful, and an enabler, right?
And well, yeah, and that's half the battle is to for the hackathon universe, you can definitely go to a hackathon, and it helps if you are curious and want to do some idea, or if you have something in mind. But it's also valuable if you have never done any of this before. My go-to story is the 70-year-old couple that came to an Intel hackathon in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and they said, "Oh, we just wanted to see how this all works." They said we were in a hotel one time, there was a fire, and they wanted to be able to send a text message or notify their kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they built an Intel Edison powered smoke detector, and I don't know if it. Probably, we'll just say that smoke detector that would send messages over the network. So you had to have a Wi-Fi network. Hopefully that would still be working. You could attach a cell, whatever. But the fact is, they had never done this before, and at the end of that weekend, they had a basically functional thing. And what you get from that is not a shippable product, but you have satisfied that intellectual curiosity that makes you say, I wonder what else I could do. And I have to be honest, I'm concerned for the future of the world, because right now, obviously the headlines are like, oh, ChatGPT will replace all of that. You don't have to do anything anymore. But so we don't have to debate that. I think that's a ridiculous notion. We'll see where that is in 2 years. But the take home is that I think people are too quick to just make it work and don't worry about it after that, like I said. And I personally, I mean, call me crazy, but I always want to know, like, wait, how does this work? I drove a stick shift car, Volkswagen Bug, and I learned how to, I dropped the engine. I would check the valves. So I was really into, not because it was like I was a musclehead or not. What is it? Musclehead, right? I wasn't into cars. I was into the system of the car. Like, how does this actually work? Like, I want my car to work all the time. And if you think about the code view, like the view of code, I want the code to work. And when it doesn't work, I want to know how it broke. And I think debugging, for example, is becoming a lost art, to be honest.
I mean, I don't know if you can call it a lost art. I'm not sure anybody has ever. I don't think it's ever been prevalent, right? Think of in the history of high tech industry, how many times people like look at something and they go, "Yeah, I can start over and do it better," rather than take
True.
the time to understand it, right? And at a big enough organization, that's happening within the organization, so you end up with duplicate solutions because people don't know how to really, that the art of debugging is actually really hard. When you start from scratch, you have the context, all the context from the get-go. Recreating that context, I think, is really challenging. And there will be many, many, many arguments about ChatGPT, AI, generative AI types of things for time immemorial. But for me, if there was one thing that sort of technology could unlock, is to kind of bootstrap that first step of debuggability to help you understand the context that most people feel more comfortable doing just by starting from scratch, right? I think that would actually give us an opportunity to create a stronger, like, let's debug it and understand it before we start to go off and try and do something else.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, the hackathon mindset sort of pushes or draws someone in that direction. I think I've been in two, like, yeah, I have done hardware board bring up, and I've done, memory controller configuration in BIOS, and I've done open firmware development in Forth, and I've done assembly language for all. So obviously I'm totally biased towards rolling up your sleeves and figuring out how stuff works. But the value proposition for that is when something doesn't work, you kind of have not, you don't know the answer necessarily, but you have like an inkling that you can go, hey, have you looked at this thing? Have you looked at that part?
Exactly.
And I'm seeing too many young, because depending on, how you pursue education, if you want to get into tech, but if you want to get into anything, if you just go, can you be a baker if you only use box cake mixes? Maybe, but do you get more from knowing how to make a cake? If I can simplify it to that, or not that I'm simplifying baking. I know that's real science. It's actual chemistry going on.
Right.
But yeah, I think the art, there's artistry and craftsmanship, or craftspersonship, if you like. I think it's too easy to think you're an artist, but you're not really serving yourself well. And then later, when you need to be able to be the craft person, you really don't know how the art worked, and you don't know how to make it work the same. So I think people are missing out by not delving in and becoming sort of immersed.
I would posit, yeah, I don't disagree, but I would posit that there's a cultural element to this as well. And, I'll always come back to culture. And the cultural element is, how are you incentivized, right? And this is a very classic thing I heard a lot at Google and that people talk about outside ex-Googlers, whatever. The joke, Google, the promo projects, right? You do the project to get the promo and then you walk away, which is why there's so many products at Google that get graveyarded, right? I don't know if that's actually true, but that's the story, right? So you think of, yeah, it's completely plausible. But you also, you think about like what, as an engineer, you think, am I going to get rewarded if I hey, I innovated this whole new thing, or am I going to get rewarded where I took this old thing and I made it better, right? Now, if I think the inclination is for us to think I innovated this thing is the thing that's going to get you rewarded. So that's the thing that you're going to focus on, or the thing that you're going to feel prouder about. But I'll give you an example. We had a service here that it was developed in-house, and it was part of how you publish. So MongoDB is, we publish actual operating system package downloadables, so you can install it in your local whatever, right? So if you're running Ubuntu, you can get MongoDB. So the mechanism by which we publish that out to the public repos, there was a service that we had, and it was slow, right? This thing, it was terrible. And so there was a project to we got to replace this thing. Nobody really knows how it works, right? And we think we can just write a new thing much, much more quickly and be better off. And then we'll know because we have that context because we wrote it, and it'll be easier to maintain. And lo and behold, one of my engineers actually spent some time digging into it, and he realized there was this one bug that he identified. That when he fixed that bug, it was some ridiculous, 90% improvement or something in performance. And so it's and I was thrilled, and I wanted to, really celebrate that he had done that because, I think it is important, and ultimately, it did save us a lot of time. Right.
Yeah.
And we got the solution, which is we need to be able to be faster about how we vet, sign, validate these RPM and Debian packages before we push them out. Great. You just fixed that. Done. Right. We move on to the next thing. And so, that was my job to make sure that behavior, that solution was celebrated as much as had he invented a new thing, if not more so. Right. To have him do it again.
Right. And part of the take home for that person is that they now know that thing, and they have that skill is that's some evolutionary biology going on right there, right? I now have this that makes me stronger in the wild when I encounter a one real example was this person here was developing a thing that was included uploading a profile picture, and it's like, hey, how come in this build some images are rotated 90 degrees? So it took me 5 seconds. I just went, can we look at the EXIF data for each image? And he's like, what is that? And I'm not making fun of him for not knowing, but I'm concerned that he didn't know what he didn't know, I guess I could say, right? So yeah, EXIF data, what do you think? So we pulled up, I found there's some known circumstances, I think in Safari maybe, where it honors the orientation and it will try to rotate the image. And I said, if you don't need the EXIF data. If you just strip it out, that'll fix it. And you shouldn't have EXIF data, and you might be leaking personal information with the location or who knows. So I said, stripping EXIF is probably going to fix it, which it did. But there was no way that this person would have gotten there anytime soon, just because there's no background. And I'm not saying you should have known that, but I am saying there should be a way to have the reflex to say, what are the possibilities? Lateral thinking for the win. And I don't know if that's still a thing. Maybe you don't have to have that.
I think it's a thing, and I think you can see evidence of it, maybe not to the degree that you would feel would be sufficient. But I think you see evidence in things like Stack Overflow, right? Yeah,
true.
And other types of forums. And it's, we're all not one, right? We all have our different strengths, our different approaches, our different ways of looking at things. But I think if the upshot is we encourage and incentivize and reward any form of creative thinking, we're doing the right things
Yeah.
from a cultural mindset to influence the behaviors that we want to see.
I am trying. I'm trying to do that with attribution and public recognition and appreciation. So yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah.
I interrupted you. I'm sorry for that.
Oh no, I was just making noises of support and approval.
I don't get that much, so I appreciate that too. We are about to run out of time. I think I have one pointed question, which you don't have to answer, but I'm curious. No, I mean, it's not a big deal, but because it comes up now and then, and because I am old, I'm just curious, just your sense, not you personally perhaps, but what do you think? Are people with experience, old people like me, or people with like the young, fresh look on the world, like who are employers looking for? I'm not going to say who are you looking for because we're not trying to put you on the spot, but like just what are you seeing from your side of the world? Because I'm seeing much more interest in younger, new, JavaScript. That's what we need.
I'm seeing both.
Okay.
Right. I'm seeing both. In some cases, you want get them young, train them right. You want the college grad. They're cheaper. Maybe you did an internship with them, and then you're going to grow them to be the kind of engineer that you want. Right. Okay, that's fine. But then you're going to have the leader that like, wow, we're going to do this thing, and we need senior staff and up.
Sure.
Right. There is no such thing as a senior staff new college grad. Right.
Yes.
So I really think that it is dependent on the type of problem, as with everything, and the smart organization and the smart leader is going to recognize, in the immediate need, what do I need to solve, right? If I have a super hard problem that we need a fast go to market, then yeah, you're going to want to use a terrible term, graybeards, or gray hairs. I don't think to be more gender inclusive.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, the old age and treachery crowd, if you will. Right?
Experienced people. Yes. That's what they are.
People who have seen it, who have the context within their domain. They have the domain expertise to be able to quickly get through all of the problems to get to wherever you need to go, right? And then as you build them, you're also thinking, okay, how do I sustain this long term? This same group of people isn't going to perpetuate indefinitely. Now, just within this one team, if you're, I think, a smart manager, in my view, you're thinking about your farm system, to use a baseball analogy. Now you want the new grads to come in to start learning this new system that the old age and treacherous people are creating, and learning it so they start fixing your bugs and eventually take over the system, right? Or maybe you have a whole new team where this is a fairly well understood problem, and maybe you need one senior person who's going to be leading the code reviews, and then you have a bunch of rookies getting started, and then eventually end up with an experienced team, right? And so you really want to be thoughtful about immediate need and long-term sustainability. And you're going to find that the answer is you need everybody in some form or another.
I always say, and then I'll let you go, I always say, I'm still learning. I don't know everything. So it doesn't stop. And I think anyone who thinks I'm a web developer now, you're like, well, you will be in 50 years.
Well, the older I know, the less I know. I'll tell you that.
Exactly. And that's when we reach that point, that's the day to celebrate graduation, right? Now you can get started on doing stuff and learning what you don't know. But anyway, I don't know if that came out right, but I know you have a hard stop now. So I'm going to thank you very much, Tara, for giving me some time today. I will always have a microphone ready to go, and we'll figure out your noise reduction software, but you're always welcome. If you're ever in Vegas, come by for a hackathon or whatever. We're doing Space Apps Challenge in October, a global hackathon, and Build Bots. If you like robots that destroy things, Build BattleBots is here. We have a little deal going with them that we'll talk about later. So always welcome. I'll let you go because I know you have to go. Thank you, Tara.
All right. Well, it was a lovely thing. It was great. Thank you so much, Dan.
Absolutely.